Hello, and welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian book reviews brought to you by the Sci-Fi-Christian.com. I am Ben DeBono, and I am talking to you today about Homer's The Iliad, which I just finished rereading this afternoon. Obviously, this is one of the great works of human history, and what I kind of want to do is give you guys a few thoughts that were going through my head as I was reading the book. It took me quite a while to read because I didn't sit down and read it straight through, and as obviously you know by now if you've been watching these reviews, I have a lot of different things that I'm reading all at once, so this one took me a while to get through. But not because it's a bad book, but because this is the type of thing you should savor and enjoy, and I certainly tried to do exactly that with this reread of the Iliad. But there was a couple things that, as I read it over the last couple months, I really was kept coming back to my mind again and again. A couple of different themes that I kept thinking about as I read it, and they have to do with comparing the Iliad as a story, as a piece of writing, as a fictional work, comparing that to what exists these days as your typical story or piece of writing or fictional work. I suppose story and fictional work are a bit redundant, but let's go, all good. Because it seems to me that there's an enormous gap between how stories would have been looked at and treated in Homer's day and how stories are looked and treated today. And it seems to me that modern pop culture could maybe learn a thing or two from studying the lessons of the Iliad. And the first thing that kind of went through my mind as I was reading the book along those lines is that our modern spoiler-phobic approach to fiction would have been completely incomprehensible and incompatible with the Iliad and its audience. You know, we have, for better or worse, I happen to think it's probably for worse, even though I tend to be guilty of it myself at times, and I do try and be sensitive to it. For better or worse, we have this tendency to, we don't want to know anything that's going to happen in the book, or the movie, or the show, or whatever, before we sit down and watch it. We don't want to be spoiled, and so, you know, people go to all these obsessive lengths of avoiding reading, you know, internet forums or even looking at posts about their favorite show on Facebook if it's something like Game of Thrones where people know what's going to happen. Or, you know, I can remember back when Lost was on the air, that was maybe one of the best examples of this, where if you fall behind by a few episodes or even one episode for a couple days, just stay off the internet until you've had a chance to watch the latest episode of Lost. And that seems to be how we treat so much of fiction today. And that's completely incomprehensible with what's going on in the Iliad. You know, the Iliad, everybody who sat down to hear this story knew what was going to happen in it. That this is the siege of Troy, and Achilles and Agamemnon are going to get pissed off at each other, and then Achilles is going to sit up the battle, and then Patroclus is going to die, and then Hector's going to die, and that's the story. Okay, so there, if you haven't read it, I just spoiled the entire book for you, and no, I'm not a bit sorry. First, because we're talking about reading a story that is not defined by being spoiled, and second, because, you know, it's 3,000 years old, and whatever the statute of limitations is on spoilers have long expired for the Iliad. So we have these two different approaches, and it really makes me think about what are we missing with our spoiler-phobic approach to literature, or to films, or to TV, or whatever. You know, what did the original hearers of the Iliad get about fiction that we don't get because we're so paranoid? And I don't know if I have a perfect answer on that, but let me offer a couple thoughts. First, I think that in our spoiler-phobic approach, we tend to miss a lot. about what's going to what's going on in the book. We're so focused on that plot twist. We're so focused on who's going to die in this episode. We're so focused on all this stuff that's going to happen that we miss the actual deeper elements of what's going on in the book. The point of the Iliad isn't that there's this shocking twist at the end where Achilles kills Hector. No, the point is, what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean thematically? What does that mean culturally? What does that even mean, religiously, if you take into account the fact that this original audience would have seen this as at least partially, a religious work. That's what matters for something like the Iliad. And it seems to me that when we sit down and we feel terrified of going on the internet because we might read who's going to die in the next season of Game of Thrones, that we're missing something. That maybe the book actually has something more to say to us that we would see if we could read it or watch it or see that movie without this obsession about spoilers. Give you a perfect example. I just finished reading about a week ago, The Idiot by Dostoevsky. Obviously, I didn't review it here because it's not sci-fi and doesn't really fit with kind of the theme of the channel. But love the book. Early on, one of the things that I love Dostoevsky. I've read that Idiot and Brothers, and both of them are wonderful. But one of the things that I have a hard time with is all the names, because you have all these long Russian names, and each character seems to have about 500 different things they could be called. So I was going online trying to figure out, okay, who's this again? Oh yeah, so I was doing a little bit of research. I happened to see a huge spoiler for the end of the book, for what was going to happen. And at first, that whole spoiler-centric thing, this is, if you've read the novel, it's the big twist at the end. Okay, so I won't spoil it here, but if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And at first I was like, oh man, I wish I hadn't seen that. Now I know what's going to happen. And then I realized, well, so what? So what? This is a great novel, not because there's a shocking twist at the end. This is a great novel because of what it has to say about the human condition, what it has to say about religion, what it has to say about characters in society, and all. That's what makes this a great novel, is the themes and philosophy behind it. And so in a sense, after I got over that initial disappointment, I realized that this is actually a chance for me to enjoy this book in a way that I maybe wouldn't if I was worried about spoilers the whole way through. And the problem is that not only do audiences obsess about spoilers, but now that's the big thing, even with writers and studios and all this, is that we have to have the big twist. We have to have, end every episode on a cliffhanger. And we're missing something when we do that. We are big time. The comparison I always use in terms of modern TV shows is you compare Lost again, where just about every episode ends on a cliffhanger, to a show like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which does have some of those cliffhanger moments, but almost every episode ends on the character beat. It's less about the big shock that's going to come in the next episode. It's less about the mystery in Buffy. It's more about the characters, the themes, and what the show is trying to say. And I think that is closer to what is going on in the Iliad. And I wish that we could recapture some of that, because we are poorer in our fictional experiences for being spoiler phobes. Okay, so that's number one. Let me talk about one other thing that really struck me along those lines as I was reading the Iliad. This is a very masculine poem. It's a very masculine story. And that's not to say women can't enjoy it, or that there aren't some good female characters, or even that you couldn't do a very interesting feminist critique of the Iliad. I'm sure it's been done, and probably done quite well. And there's probably been a lot that's been very valuable in that. But, so all that said, this is a very masculine work. You have two armies going to war. It's all about who's going to kill who. Yes, we have Helen, but she's really in the background for most of the poem. She doesn't appear on stage very often. And even some of the female gods are involved in more of this clash between the Trojans and the Achaeans. So we have all these masculine elements. But what struck me, and maybe it's because I was reading this along the time, I don't remember exactly when I started, but in the last couple months we've had Iron Man 3, we've had Superman or Man of Steel, and all these superhero movies coming out that seem to also be trying to appeal to that masculine demographic, the ever-important 18 to 35 male demographic that studios always want to hit. And so in a sense, and I don't want to overstate the case here, but in a sense you could say that the Iliad has a similar goal. It's probably the wrong way to put it, but stick with me here for a second, as something like Iron Man 3 and Man of Steel has. It is directly appealing to that masculine, high testosterone demographic. But here's the difference, is that in the Iliad, and granted, yes, it's a poem instead of a movie, but in the Iliad, it isn't about the big action scene. It isn't about how cool can we make this fight. It isn't about any of that. And again, this is because of a cultural and time divide. But it seems to me that if our goal in adding these CGI video game-esque sequences to movies like Iron Man and Man of Steel and a host of countless others that I find incredibly boring, if our goal with adding those is to appeal to men and to that masculine energy in that ever-important demographic, from a studio standpoint anyway, that we're doing it wrong. We're doing it wrong. Because here's Homer 3,000 years ago. I don't know the exact date the Iliad was written, just FYI, so 3,000 is my rough estimate. But we have Homer 3,000 years ago writing a work that appeals to the same demographic, but doesn't have that video game immature feel at any point of it. That the masculine themes are here aren't, let's see how much crap we can blow up, let's see how many people we can kill. It's the quest for glory. It's the quest to prove yourself as a man, to stand up and fight for something. And it explores those themes without descending to the level of a 13-year-old jacked up on Mountain Dew. And again, it seems like our pop culture is poor for that. That we tend to only enjoy, or we tend to think that the way to make a movie that's going to appeal to young men is to load it with CGI crap, boring action scenes, and large-breasted women, and we're just going to use that as a license to print money. Maybe it works from a financial standpoint, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing, and it doesn't mean that it's actually reaching those men in a way that is helpful to them, or helpful to our culture, or even helpful to literature as an area of humanity, okay? And so again, on this, just like with spoilers, I think that people who say, we want to make these movies to get guys in the seats, we want to make that show that's going to make men watch, fine. Fine. I have no problem with that. But don't do it by going the hyperactive Mountain Dew route. Look at what Homer did and study that, because this is a brilliant example of how you can have a masculine piece of literature without it being stupid. You can have it and be intelligent, and it can be thought-provoking, and it can make you think about your humanity and still appeal to those masculine qualities. Okay, so let me wrap this up, because I'm obviously gone on for quite a while. This is a brilliant piece of literature, and my hope would be that it can be rediscovered along the lines of what I'm talking about. I feel like if people can go back and read the Iliad, they will be able to maybe get past some of these stupid aspects of pop culture that cheapen our experience of literature and stories. Because I think stories are very valuable. They tell us something about the human condition. They're not just there to entertain us and have us shut our brains off for a couple hours. They're there to tell us about our humanity. That's what I think stories are for. And that's really, if you want to take a thesis statement for why Matt and I do the Sci-Fi Christian, it's to explore that concept of stories as something that tell us about ourselves or our world, or to hit on the Christian part of our title, God, his plan for redemption in the world, what have you. Stories are designed to do that, and we're cheapening them by some of these spoilerific elements, by some of these hyperactive ADD type elements that have crept into modern literary standards, and we are poorer for it. We need to go back to Homer and other writers like that and relearn how to actually tell stories in meaningful ways, and for those of us who maybe aren't storytellers, experience stories in meaningful ways. And the Iliad will help you do exactly that. So that's my review / rant of my thoughts that occurred to me while reading the Iliad. If you've never read it, do yourself a favor. This is one of the great works that humanity has ever produced, and you owe it to yourself to experience it. So, no doubt you may find that you have thoughts completely different than mine, and that's the great thing about a work like this, is that it will speak to you in a different way. But those are my thoughts on this reread. Love the book, as always. It's so important. Please read it if you haven't, and if you have, reread it, and maybe think about some of the things that I have talked about here on this video. So that's all for now. I'm Ben DeBono, and this is the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews. Goodbye.